Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next in our Export Skills Program series. And today we draw a conclusion to the Marketing Masterclass. Thanks to those of you that have attended all the previous sessions. That means you have devoted 8 weeks to this particular module. And many of you, of course, have been attending some of the others as well. So it's always great to have the pleasure of your company. I'm Collins Rex. I'm a director with the Global Trade Professionals Alliance, and the GTPA is an organisation that cultivates international standards within the industry. Our aim is to create a trade environment that is both inclusive and trusted by all. And the GTPA has partnered with Global Victoria to deliver this comprehensive export skills program, which kicked off way back about 8 weeks ago now. And we certainly look forward to the remaining sessions as well. And the address that you see on your screen will take you directly to the page where you can register for any of the upcoming sessions. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, which for me is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Straits Islanders people who might be joining us on today's webinar. As always, I just draw your attention to the disclaimer on the screen, and please bear in mind that the information is of a general nature, so you need to make sure that it is of specific relevance to you. And also, of course, today's webinar is being recorded. As I mentioned, I'm Collins Rex. I'm a director with the GTPA, and I will be your presenter for today's session. So over the course of the past 8 weeks, we've covered a fair bit of ground in the Marketing Masterclass. Starting off on the 26th of April, we did with the Marketing Refresher. We've worked our way through international marketing strategy, digital marketing, branding, and we looked at the marketing funnel and building a brand. We looked at marketing versus sales. We did some sales techniques in last week's face-to-face workshop. And today we bring it all to a conclusion with marketing to international customers. So today's session, we're going to look at some key points that you need to take into account before you start. We're also going to look at international marketing strategy with specific emphasis on those international customers, the effective use of digital marketing and some hints and tips along the way. And then finally, we'll look at some of the fun stuff, some international marketing winners and losers, those that got it right and those that got it pretty wrong. And of course, as always, you're more than welcome to type any questions in the chat box and we'll take them as we go along, or else we'll keep them to the end of today's session. I will also, at the end of today's session, give you my email address. So just bear in mind, if you do want a copy of today's deck, you can send me an email and ask me to send it to you. So before you start, you really do need to be perfectly comfortable with going global. And that means you need to consider whether going global is right for your, and I emphasize your because every business is different, whether it's right for your business, your brand or your brands, and or your products or your services. So at the very least, you need to answer these questions. Do I have it? Do they want it? Can they afford it? May I sell it? And can I supply it? Before you start, you might want to weed out some of the more difficult markets. You need to think about really picking your battles and not starting out in a way that is too difficult for you. So first of all, you might want to consider markets that have a relatively low barrier to entry, and that includes things like little to no language barrier. For example, it is easier for an Australian company to use near identical messages and marketing materials in other English-speaking audiences. So for example, in the United Kingdom or in the USA. Close proximity is always a winner. If you're dealing with physical shipping, There's obviously a geographic advantage of entering foreign markets that aren't half the world away. The Pacific, for example, is relatively close to us, as is Indonesia. Of course, some of the Pacific nations are still quite complicated in terms of shipping, but they are physically a lot closer for market visits, etc. Think about similar demographics. So ideally, your target audience, both at home and abroad, should be similar. And here, for example, we think of a country like New Zealand. And this certainly rings true when it comes to factors like gender split, age, spending power, and the like. You also want to consider the cost and the resources involved in expansion. Entering foreign markets is not cheap. Even without getting into the nitty-gritty, here are some of the costs that you need to consider. Shipping costs, legal expenses, and that includes registering your business in a new location, ensuring that your intellectual property is protected, licensing, contracts, and the like. Foreign taxes, translation services, and this is across the board for everything from social media accounts to multilingual SEO and a raft of other issues. Also, new employees, whether those employees are working for you in a physical location or they are working for you online. It is still an expense that you have to take into account. And this includes consultants who might assist you with the business and contractors who you use for specific services. And of course, there are travel expenses involved as well. You also really do need to make your market research count. The importance of market research cannot be overstated when it comes to entering foreign markets. It's well documented, for example, that Western companies have totally failed in many cases to expand into China, despite seemingly endless opportunities to do so on paper. And that is simply because very often there hasn't been enough paid to research. Francis, thank you for your query. If you wouldn't mind, we'll keep that one to the end because it is of a more general nature. You also need to make sure that you do in-depth research because it does count. And that includes doing research on all of the following and then some. The economy. Is the country on the brink of a recession, perhaps? Or have they been experiencing a recent boom? That has to feature into how you choose your market. What are the demographics? Do their consumers mirror the consumers that you are comfortable selling to? What is the culture? Is the country progressive? Is it conservative? Or does it sit somewhere in between, like many places do? Are there any cultural, societal, or religious conflicts between your brand and the average consumer? You do need to be realistic about what you can sell and where you can sell it. And sometimes where you can sell products is quite surprising. So you might find, for example, that you are a manufacturer and a seller of swimwear, and you might particularly specialize in bikinis. You might think that the Middle East as a market is one that you shouldn't consider. However, if you consider the way in which women's society functions within those countries, very often they do wear bikinis. They just wear them behind closed doors when they are with other women. But that is an outlet, definitely, for your product. Also think about regulations. Are there any legal barriers to stop you doing business in a particular market? It could be that there are quotas that attach to your particular product, that you cannot export those products into that market because the quotas have already been met. It could be that there are no protocols established for the importation of certain products, and that certainly applies to many food and beverage products in a range of different markets. There might be other legal barriers. You might be providing defense services, for example, that are forbidden in certain countries. Also, of course, consider the costs. Will it be cheaper or more expensive to do business overseas than it is at home? Would those costs be similar to doing business at home, or will they be substantially different? And you should not forget your competitor analysis. Just because your direct competitors aren't involved in a particular market doesn't mean that this is an opportunity for you. There might be a reason why your usual competitors haven't expanded into that market, and this could include local competitors and other economic factors. So you do need to do a detailed competitive analysis. Identify your competitors. Gather data about your competitors, and that includes what they sell, how they sell it, the channels through which they market, etc. Analyze that activity and then use that data to inform the next level of your analysis. The more data you accumulate, the better you will do in terms of understanding your competition and being able to take them on. So let's look now at that international marketing strategy with a particular emphasis to marketing to your international customers. And let's start off by using the P's. Now, we've discovered the 4 P's and the 4 P's plus 3. We've also looked at the 4 P's plus 3 plus 3. So we've gone through the 4 P's in some detail. So we'll take all of that as read and understood, and we're going to move into some high-level discussion about how you should adapt your marketing strategy specifically for an international audience. So first of all, people. You need to understand consumer behavior in a world that is different from the one with which you are familiar. This is the people you're marketing to and the product you're marketing. And we're starting with the people because if you don't first and foremost understand to whom you are marketing, you might try to sell a product they don't want and probably won't buy. Or you might try to sell it in a place that doesn't suit local buying habits. And when you're thinking of people, remember we talked way back when of those avatars and understanding the personas of your customers. You need to know whether you're selling to the bald-headed gentleman on the left or the red-headed lady on the right or anyone else in between. When it comes to product, you need to think about how you are going to alter your product to fit the needs of your new market. If you notice that a current offering of your product won't work in the new market you want to enter, you can do one of 2 things. You could decide not to sell in that market, or you can change your offering to meet the local demand. And you are going to concentrate on number 2 if the demand is such that it justifies any changes you need to make, including the additional expenses you incur, because there is sufficient critical mass of people who want to buy your product or your service. So a classic example of this is McDonald's, the good old fast food outlet. So McDonald's has close to 35,000 restaurants in 119 countries. And of course, they couldn't do it the same way in every single one of those countries. What happened is that McDonald's adjusted its menu to suit local tastes. They put in the work to understand the people they were about to serve, and they altered their offering to fit their palates. And that means that in France, you're going to find dishes that are more sophisticated, that appeal more to sophisticated French palates. In China, you're going to find dishes that are far more Asian in flavor, using spicing sauces, etc., that are familiar to the Asian palate. The next P you need to think about is price. And this, of course, is whether you choose a premium or an economy pricing strategy, or you're going to decide to fall somewhere in the middle. So generally, if you already have a product or service that is successful in one area of the world, the price point you use won't vary much in comparison to the competition in that area. If what you have is a premium product, it's likely to be a premium product everywhere. And if you have a more affordable, economically friendly project, it'll probably be the same in a new market as well. Why? Well, it's consistency. People do their research. If you are selling a particular product at a price point in Australia, and that is priced at an economy product level, and you then try to sell exactly the same product in Japan, but you've priced it as a premium product, those consumers know what the price is in Australia, and they are not going to pay the higher price in Japan. So you have to be careful about thinking that you can get away with pricing in a market when people are already familiar with what you charge somewhere else. So if we look, for example, at selling watches, if you look at the two pictures on your screen, on the left-hand side, you have a Rolex. On the right-hand side, you have a Swatch. You are not going to sell a Swatch at the same price point as a Rolex. It doesn't matter which market you go into, because everybody understands the value of the Swatch compared to the value of the Rolex. You need to determine whether what you're selling is the Rolex or the Swatch, and you need to price accordingly in the markets you're going into. When it comes to promotion, you need to choose strategies that work in your new environment, not the ones that are tried and tested in your current Australian environment, or indeed in any other markets in which you are already active. If you're going into a new market, you need to know what works in that market. You need to understand the most effective method for marketing your product or services, and it might be different from what you do domestically. What isn't any different is that the way you know is by doing the research and understanding your customer. So which social media platforms, for example, reign supreme in your new market? Is the market susceptible to buy one, get one messages in retail stores? Is email an acceptable form of marketing communication? Does your new target market like discounts and special promotions? Should I be advertising on television in this part of the world, you need to ask yourself, or is YouTube more appropriate? Just because it works in one market doesn't mean it's going to work in another. Place, of course, is a crucial component of what and how you sell in new markets. You need to understand the sales avenue that your consumers in that target market use. So defining where you'll market and indeed where you'll advertise your product or service is one thing, but finding the right place to actually sell your offering is another. And remember, we've discussed at length the difference between marketing and sales and how they need to work together. You need to understand both. You need to know how to market the product, but when people finally are ready to make that buying decision, you need to understand how and where they buy. So some people prefer to shop in person. They like to see the product, they like to touch the product, fit it if it's a garment, test it if it's an item of tool, for example. So just to give you a fairly random example, 52% of Montenegrins prefer to shop in person. This is the most of any European country. Others, like customers in the United States and China, actually prefer to shop online. So where do your customers prefer to shop, and how do you then reach them? If you sell through bricks and mortar, you have to consider the preferred store layout of your customers, the merchandising that they're familiar with, where they like to find things on shelves, where they look for things on shelves, etc. And if you sell online, you need to think how your new target customers use websites. Do they read left to right? Do they read right to left? What are their preferred checkout options? How do they prefer to pay, etc.? The next P is packaging, and that means you need to get the packaging right. The way you package your product or your service is going to vary from country to country. Now, there's some things that you have no control over, things that you have to by law do in certain markets. And then there are the sorts of things that you need to do if you are going to cut through. So think about some of these questions. Are international brand names important when you promote and distinguish your product? Maybe your customers want to see your Australian brand on the shelves because that is what attracts them. Maybe they don't want to see your Australian brand because they are used to buying high-end European brands, for example, and you have to rethink your branding. The colors that you use on your labels and your packages, are they offensive or attractive to foreign buyers? And offensive doesn't mean literally that they find them rude. It means that they find them off-putting and therefore are not going to be attracted to them. Can labels and instructions be produced in official or customary languages if you have to put them on by law or practice? That means you need to understand the regulation and you need to understand how your usual label information translates into the languages that you have to use in those countries. Also understand that some countries have more than 1 or 2 or 3 official languages, and you may have to reproduce your labels in a range of different languages. A country like South Africa, for example, has 11 official languages. Now, you don't have to put your labels into all of those official languages, but you do need to understand that you might get queries about your labeling in any one of those languages. Does information on product content and the country of origin have to be included on the label or the packaging? And that includes the label on the actual product and the packaging that goes on the outside of that product. Are weights and measures stated in the local unit? Is it metric, for example? Or it might not be the metric system, in which case you might have to use pounds and ounces instead of kilograms, etc. What happens to individual labels? Does each item have to be labeled individually, or can you get away with batch labeling? What is the language that you have to use on that label? And then, of course, we come down to tastes and preferences. What do people like to see on labels? In certain Asian markets, people like to see actual representations of what is inside the packaging. They don't want abstract labels that might be very pretty. They want to see pictures of the product that is inside. In other countries, it's the exact opposite. They want to see those artistic, more amorphous type labels, and you have to adapt accordingly if you are going to sell. Positioning is critical when you enter a new market. If your initial positioning fails, trying to reposition your product will be expensive. And even then, it might not work because people will already associate you with the original positioning that they saw. So it's really important that you get positioning right, or as close as you can to right the first time around. So a significant part of your positioning will be evident in the messages you relay in your marketing campaigns. Of course, you need to use your unique value proposition, but that includes a number of different factors. The relevance, how is your product going to solve a problem in your new target market? The value, so what are the specific benefits and the perceived benefits of your product compared to the competitor products already there? Differentiation. Why is it that people should choose your product or your service over that of the competition? You need to take all of that into account. And of course, that is also going to determine ultimately your price point. Physical evidence is very important as well. And here we're looking at 3 main areas: the physical environment, the ambience, and the spatial layout. So here we're talking about physically selling goods in a particular market, as opposed to selling services, or indeed as opposed to selling stuff online. The physical environment is the physical space that surrounds the consumer during the service or the experience. So if you're selling food, then the restaurant is the physical environment. If you're selling professional services, for example, we're talking about the law office in which you're selling the legal services, etc. Ambience is a subsidiary of the physical environment. It's about the mood and the feeling inside the physical space. And here, colors, music, lighting have an enormous impact on the way people perceive your presence. And finally, we're talking about spatial layout. This is the way in which customers need to move about a physical space. So if, for example, we think of the massive American retail outlet, Costco, retail wholesale in some cases, those stores are all really large with very large trolleys, etc. those stores could be overwhelming for customers in Japan, for example, because of their sheer size. And if you look at your screen, you can see a Costco store on the left and an average Japanese apartment on the right. You can fit several of those apartments in every aisle, just about, in a Costco. What does Costco need to do to make that physical space attractive and less overwhelming for Japanese customers? Well, part of that comes down to the marketing, and part of that comes down to where those stores are physically located. In the case of Japan, Costco is a very successful brand because people like to get out of the major cities into the more fringe parts of the cities, and they like to walk through those big wide aisles. And once you've taken into account the P's, and we covered 8 of those today, a couple of other things that you do need to take into account when you are planning your marketing drive into a new market. Use your people. And a quote that you see there from Natalie Kelly that was in the Harvard Business Review recently: one of the most disappointing mistakes I've seen companies make is that they hire highly competent, intelligent local people to serve their overseas markets and then fail to consider their input when making strategic decisions. Not only do you have to make sure that your local teams are incorporated into your global marketing strategy, but you need to listen to them. They're a really valuable resource. Make use of them. And even if you don't have people on the ground in that market, if you employ people who are of a particular cultural background, who speak certain languages, ask their opinion on your activities, because they will be able to tell you how it will be perceived by the consumers in that market. Now let's look at some digital marketing channels that you might choose to employ and how to effectively use those in international markets. First of all, think about whether you need multiple brand accounts across your social media channels. You might think that you need to create a new account for each foreign market, but if you do, also take into account that it becomes exponentially more time and labor intensive. So it's really only the very big brands that can afford to do this. I suggest that you stick with a single global account, and if there's a massive demand from a particular market, then you might want to expand into a different account in that market. So if your main account is being bombarded, for example, with service requests or questions from a specific country, maybe it's time to have a supplementary social presence in that country. And if we look at one of the big boys who certainly does something for everyone, Levi's is the case in point, and this is just a short extract of where and how you will find them. And here you see the official US one, you see Indonesia, the Philippines, South Africa, and they have dozens of other official Facebook pages. Discover those opportunities that allow you to cross-post and diversify your content strategy. Every time you enter a new market, you create new opportunities for yourself. And these are literally creative opportunities. And that means you can expand your social content. You can think differently about socials. And in fact, you should be thinking differently about your social content. You might want to define separate marketing messages and materials depending on your audience's location. So brands like Netflix, for example, have dedicated Twitter accounts based on geography, and some of them look very different from the main accounts. There could also be instances where having these multiple accounts can allow you to double dip your social media content irrespective of geography. And this is Netflix. And if you went to the main Netflix site, you would see that it looks very different from Netflix in the Philippines. Here is the main site. Main site looks at specific issues that cross borders, whereas the one for the Philippines drills down into those issues that are important to an audience in the Philippines. Also craft campaigns that speak to your audience's language. And we're not just talking English versus another language. We're talking about tone. We're talking about the type of language that customers use in different markets. So a brand like Vegemite, for example, is so uniquely Australian, and it always makes a point of sparking conversations specifically targeting local customers. So in the case of the picture that you see there, what goes first, butter or Vegemite, which is the ultimate Aussie debate. Think about how that would translate to a market in, for example, South Korea. And if you were to directly translate it into Korean using, for example, Google Translate, would that be good enough? And would it resonate even if it were accurately translated into another language? It is vitally important that you understand your audience's culture and their customs. If you're posting on social media without the basic idea of who your customers are and what is important to them from a cultural and a religious perspective, you are going to run into trouble. Whether it be holidays and religious customs or cultural norms, you have to familiarize yourself with your target audience's culture, because that is crucial to your success. If you don't do so, at best, your brand will seem insensitive and out of touch, and at worst, you're going to offend people. And of course, you are also going to lose very valuable opportunities to connect with your customers. So the ad that you see on the screen there relates to Arsenal, the football club, and it is one that was running in the Middle East. And of course, it talks about Ramadan. If yours is a food and beverage company, you need to take very close notice of the rules and regulations that govern when and how people may or may not eat over the month of Ramadan, for example. Also double check the regulations and the costs involved in your social media content. What works marketing-wise in Australia may not work as well in overseas markets. And if we look at data privacy regulation, for example, you really don't have to go beyond GDPR, because this clearly determines how people do business, how they collect data, and how they use data, irrespective of where in the world they are. Also, things like pay-per-click and how Facebook ads vary in terms of costing from one market to another need to be taken into account when you are planning how you are going to supplement your organic content with paid content. So when in doubt, speak to other people who are already running international campaigns in that market, or run some test campaigns and see how they go. You need to check the timing of your posts. Not all social media has the same timing for that sweet spot. So check the best times to post on social media and understand where the best engagement rates are likely to occur. And of course, don't forget about time zones. Just because it's morning in Australia doesn't mean it's morning for your target market. So don't be posting things about good morning. You need to understand so that you are relatable to your target market. I'd like to finish today's session by looking at some of those organizations, and most of them are really big organizations that got it badly wrong, and then we'll look at some that do manage to get it very right. So if we look at the international marketing losers, BMW made the marketing mistake of improperly using the national anthem of the United Arab Emirates in one of its car commercials. The ad displayed a football club singing the anthem and then breaking into a run towards several cars when they heard the sound of the engine. Now, the brand was trying to arouse emotion, trying to convey that through the use of imagery and sound. Emiratis, however, found it offensive that the car company suggested its cars were more important than the national anthem. Now, they backtracked, they explained what they were trying to do, they apologized, and they've since adjusted their campaign. But that is the sort of thing that happens without considering the cultural impact of a particular campaign. Dolce and Gabbana have had a couple of misses in the last while, one of which was a series of ads on social media where a Chinese woman attempted to eat Italian food with chopsticks and a male voice gives her directions. Tone deaf on so many levels, it's not even funny. The ad was denounced. Consumers in China, which is one of the largest markets for Dolce & Gabbana, threatened to boycott the brand. And of course, they've had a couple of other misses in recent times in the Chinese market. It really is important to know the cultural sensitivities of your market. Ford found that enticing customers with a dead body in every car probably isn't the best way to make a sale. So they tried to highlight their excellent manufacturing, and they launched an ad campaign in Belgium that they thought said every car has a high quality body. In other words, the actual physical body of the car, the metal thing that you sit into. But when it was translated, the slogan actually read, every car has a high quality corpse. Not quite the image that Ford wanted to portray. Nike, also mistranslations. It's created controversies several times over design concepts. In 1997, for example, they featured a flame-shaped logo on the back of its Nike Air shoe that resembled the Arabic word for Allah. And then they did it again in 2019. Again, same word, same way that it was represented, and it made it appear that the wearers were stepping on the name of the Prophet, which of course is not a great way to go. Mercedes-Benz, well, they did the same thing. Going into the Chinese market, they shortened the name to Benzi, but that word, when translated, was rush to die, which is not you want from a car company. They rebranded to Benchy, which means run quickly as if flying, which of course is far more appropriate. And our dear friends, IKEA, that can come up with such wonderful names for their products, and I have to show you what it looks like, came up with the fartful workbench, which in the United States, on the one hand, people found very funny, and on the other, people found really offensive. And now from the losers to the winners. And one of these is certainly Airbnb. They launched a campaign to bring their worldwide community of hosts and guests closer in the wake of COVID-19, where, of course, people weren't traveling and couldn't be using Airbnb. So the company referred to the campaign as a way to highlight the magical experiences that hosts bring to guests. And what they did was they took real videos and photographs from guests and they put them in a video to create the sense of nostalgia we feel when we travel. And the photograph there is an actual photograph submitted by one of their guests. Over 3 million people worldwide have engaged in the campaign. They've created content, they've talked about the campaign, and one of the videos, just one of them, has had over 3.5 million views. Dunkin' Donuts, the American brand, has a campaign that they run around National Donut Day. And yes, the spelling there is the American one because that's what it's called. Donut Day happens every year in June. And in the US, of course, there are things like the Boston cream donut. But Dunkin' Donuts in China serves up a fresh batch of dry pork and seaweed donuts to great effect every year. They have 3,200 stores in 36 countries outside of the US. So their menu, just like the McDonald's one we talked about earlier, has evolved to satisfy the sweet tooth of the global customer, irrespective of where that customer is or what it is that they prefer to eat. The World Wildlife Fund takes a very literal approach to global marketing because it has hundreds of offices worldwide and each has a highly localized goal for each region. And one of the things it does every year is promote Earth Hour. And in Norway, where of course you have extreme daylight hours in different seasons, this country was a prime candidate for Earth Hour. And they came up with a campaign that started with a banner, and then the screen just goes completely black. And as you swipe the screen, the Earth Hour countdown comes up. Very successful, has won awards all over the world, and has also been very, very popular with potential consumers who, of course, in this case are people who buy products from the World Wildlife Foundation, but most specifically are people who donate money to the WWF. And then there's Red Bull. Of course, one of its tactics is to host extreme sports events all over the world. And it runs from the Red Bull Indianapolis Grand Prix to the Red Bull soapbox race in Jordan. Very, very powerful marketing, very, very powerful imagery. And along with that comes the Red Bull packaging, which everybody instantly recognizes. And in fact, in many countries, consumers assume that Red Bull is a local brand because it is that well incorporated into the local market. And that brings us to the end of today's session. So just to recap, international marketing is the act of focusing a product on the needs of potential buyers in other countries. And the emphasis there is on the needs of buyers. Like most types of marketing, a global marketing strategy comes down to one thing, and that is knowing your audience. Who needs your product, what form they need it in, and how to market it in a way that strengthens the brand. All core ingredients of the best possible global marketing. Now, if you do have any questions, I'm more than happy to take them now. You can type them in the chat box. And just going back to your query, Francis, where you say you've had emails returned, not delivered to the email address. Not quite sure what the problem is. Certainly haven't had any issues with emails coming through, generally speaking. But then if I haven't received it, it's because I don't know that I haven't received it. The address absolutely is valid, and the address that you're referring to is the one that you see on your screen. collinsrex@gtpalliance.com. That is the correct email address. I'm afraid I don't really know what else to tell you on that score, but keep trying it. And if it still doesn't come through today, I've got your details, so I will get on to you. And perhaps if you reply to an email, it'll be more effective. Again, the URL will take you to the remaining sessions in the program. So as I mentioned, today is the final one in the Marketing Masterclass, but we still have a couple to come in the e-commerce stream. And there is one more to come in the International Business Rules Scheme, where we're going to be looking at doing business in the Middle East and North Africa on the 27th of this month. Just having a quick look to see if there are. Yes, indeed, Herbert. It means that it's not just the small guys who make mistakes. The big guys certainly do it, and they do it with much deeper pockets. So when they get it wrong, they tend to get it very wrong. Daniel, you're asking about digital brochures. I don't design brochures myself. I'm not a marketing, I'm a marketing person, but I'm not a digital design person. I have responded to you, I'm pretty sure, in an email where you asked that question. If you can't find that response, just send me another email and remind me, and I will respond to you accordingly. I will do that, Francis. Absolutely. I will send you an email, and again, I will laugh with you, I'm sure, when I see the response to the email. Any other questions, feel free to type them, but failing that, all that remains is to say thank you very much for your attention over the course of this particular module. It's been a lot of fun, and it's been really great to have so many of you with me from beginning all the way through to the end. Send me an email if you'd like a copy of today's deck, and hopefully it makes its way through to me, Francis, and others. And in due course, Global Victoria will also be making available recordings of all the webinars. So if you missed any of them, you'll be able to catch up. So thank you, everyone. And I look forward to seeing you later in the week at the next e-commerce session for those of you who attend the e-commerce sessions. And I'm sure we'll see each other in other forums, if not in that particular one. So thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Go off and do some good business. Goodbye.